They say the ruin wasn't the end of my story. They say it was the beginning. But before you can understand the architect, you have to walk through the ruins. You have to feel the dust of a shattered life under your feet and see the ghost of the woman who used to live there. A woman who believed her kingdom was safe, her king was noble, and the walls of her perfect American dream were unshakable. She had no idea she was living in a house already condemned, a castle built on sand, a life that was about to be demolished from the inside out. This isn't the story of how my marriage ended, this is the story of how I began. I remember the scent of our home. It was a carefully curated blend of lemon polish, fresh-cut grass from the yard service, and whatever was simmering on the stove for dinner. It was the scent of order, of control, of a life running exactly as it should. I was the manager of that life. It was my job, my identity, my entire portfolio. I was the ever-present mom for PTA meetings and soccer practice, the devoted wife who ironed his shirts just so, and always had a cold drink ready when he walked through the door. My value wasn't something I generated, it was something I reflected, like a mirror showing the world how successful my husband was, how perfect my children were, how seamless our life appeared. The house was our castle, and I was its queen. And like any queen of that era, I ceded control of the treasury. It seemed logical. He was the one out in the world, the one who understood the markets and the complexities of finance. "You handle the home, I'll handle the money," he'd say with a pat on my hand. It felt like a partnership, a division of labor. I handed him the keys to everything, our bank accounts, our retirement plans, our future. I also handed him my blind trust, the most valuable and dangerous asset of all. I didn't see it then, but I was willingly participating in my own dissolution. I was suffering from the most silent and crippling of conditions, the good wife syndrome. It's a disease of vanishing, where your own name, your own ambitions, your own soul, slowly fade until all that's left is a title, his wife. A friend from college called me once, years into the marriage. She was a partner at her law firm now. She asked what I was up to, what happened to that fire I used to have, the one who was going to argue cases before the Supreme Court. I laughed it off. "Oh, that was another life," I said, glancing at the family portrait on the mantel. "This is my full-time job now, and the benefits are great." But after I hung up, a strange, hollow feeling echoed inside me. It was the first faint tremor before the earthquake, a tiny crack in the foundation I had so carefully built my life upon. The discovery wasn't a single, dramatic moment of walking in on him with someone else. It was slower, more insidious. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It started with our credit card being declined at the grocery store. I was mortified. I called him, and he was breezy, dismissive. "Just a glitch with the bank, honey. Use the other one." Then came a letter in the mail, addressed to both of us, from a lender I'd never heard of. It had a bright red, "Final Notice" stamped across the envelope. Before I could even open it, he snatched it from my hand, his smile a little too tight. "More junk mail, I'll take care of it." The whispers of doubt grew louder. I started to do something I hadn't done in 15 years. I started looking. I waited until he was on a business trip, my hands shaking as I went into his pristine home office, a room that had always been his sacred space. I felt like a trespasser in my own home. I opened a drawer and found a stack of bank statements hidden beneath old tax returns. Statements from an account I didn't know existed. The numbers swam before my eyes. Withdrawals, thousands of dollars at a time, payments to names I didn't recognize. And then I saw it, a second mortgage on our house. The house I thought we owned, the house my name was on. He had forged my signature. The air left my lungs. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a demolition. The other woman? I found out about her later, almost as an afterthought. The real betrayal wasn't in a hotel room. It was on those bank statements. It was in the high-risk investments that had evaporated our savings. It was in the mountain of secret debt, all tied to my name, my social security number, my future. The financial ruin wasn't a consequence of our divorce. It was the cause. It was the weapon he had been using for years to slowly dismantle our life, brick by brick, while I was busy polishing the floors and baking cookies in the kitchen. The confrontation was quiet, eerily so. I laid the papers out on our polished dining room table, the same table where we hosted holiday dinners and helped the kids with their homework. There was no screaming, no throwing plates, there was just a cold, dead silence. He didn't deny it. He tried to justify it, to explain it away as a series of bad bets, of trying to build a bigger kingdom for us. He even tried to blame me. If you had been more engaged, if you had any idea how much pressure I was under. In that moment, I realized I wasn't married to the man I thought I knew. I was married to a stranger. An architect of ruins, who had spent years planning and executing the destruction of our life, of my life. The love didn't just die, it had been murdered. And I was standing at the crime scene, realizing I was the victim who had slept through the entire attack. The rug wasn't just pulled out from under me, the entire floor had collapsed, and I was in a freefall. The first few weeks after he left are a blur of pure animal panic. The house, my castle, suddenly felt like a prison filled with ghosts of a life that was a lie. Every framed photo on the wall was a testament to a fraud. Every piece of furniture was a stage prop in a play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. I had to get out. But to where? I had no money. The joint accounts were empty. The secret debts had destroyed my credit. I was 45 years old with a 15-year gap in my resume and a skill set that included carpool logistics and stain removal. The mirror showed me a stranger. A competent, efficient ghost with no place in the real world. The legal process was a fresh layer of hell. I sat in sterile conference rooms for depositions, my entire life reduced to a spreadsheet. A condescending lawyer on the other side of the table would ask questions like, "Mrs. Miller, are you telling this court you had no knowledge of your family's finances for over a decade?" Every question was an accusation, not of his betrayal, but of my naivete, my foolishness. The system wasn't there to protect me. It was there to quantify my stupidity. I wasn't a victim. I was an accomplice to my own ruin. The courage to leave the house for good wasn't born from some deep well of inner strength. It was born from the sheer, primal terror of what would happen if I stayed. I would become a permanent ghost in that house, a relic of a life that never truly existed. I would simply disappear. So I packed 2 suitcases with the few things that felt truly mine, and I walked away. I left the manicured lawn, the 2-car garage, the memories, and the woman I used to be. That first step off the porch, closing the door behind me for the last time, was the most terrifying, liberating step of my entire life. I was leaping into an abyss, holding on to the fragile, desperate hope that there was something at the bottom other than the final impact. My new life began in a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the faucet dripped, and the whole place smelled faintly of fabric softener and despair. For the first week, I just sat on the floor because I had no furniture, and I cried. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rumble of the dryers downstairs and the sound of my own ragged breaths. I was paralyzed by the sheer enormity of starting over. How do you reset a circuit breaker? How do you negotiate a utility bill? How do you write a resume when your last job title was mom? The first victory was the smallest. It was a cheap bookshelf from IKEA. It came in a flat box with 1,000 tiny pieces and a wordless, cryptic instruction manual. I spent 6 hours on the floor of that empty apartment, surrounded by screws and particle board, wrestling with that stupid thing. I got splinters. I put one of the shelves in upside down. I cried out of sheer frustration. But then, at 2 a.m, it was done. It was wobbly and a little crooked, but it was standing. I had built something. With my own 2 hands, I had taken a box of chaos and created order. I stood back and looked at that lopsided bookshelf, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than fear. I felt a flicker of pride. That bookshelf became a metaphor. My life was a flat-packed box of broken pieces, and I had to figure out how to put it back together, one screw at a time. I started applying for jobs. Dozens of them. The rejections were brutal. Overqualified. Underqualified. Too long of a gap in your employment history. But I kept going. fueled by cheap coffee and the mounting dread of my dwindling savings. Finally, I got a call. An entry-level administrative assistant position at a small marketing firm. The pay was a fraction of what my husband used to spend on a single golf weekend. But it was a start. I'll never forget my first paycheck. It wasn't a direct deposit into a joint account I couldn't access. It was a physical, paper check with my name on it. Just my name. I held it in my hands, and it felt heavier than a brick of gold. The number on it looked so small, but to me, it was a declaration of independence. It was tangible proof that I could survive. I didn't cash it right away. I took it back to my little apartment, sat on the floor next to my wobbly bookshelf, and I looked at it for a long, long time. This wasn't just money. It was survival. It was freedom. It was the first solid brick I had laid for my new foundation. Today, the woman speaking to you is not a victim. That woman is gone. The ruins of her life are still there. A part of my history, but they are not my home. I am the architect who learned to build on that broken ground. I learned that my self-worth isn't tied to a zip code or a bank statement. It's forged in resilience. It's measured in the peace I feel in this small apartment that is all mine, a sanctuary I built myself. The financial ruin he created taught me the true value of everything, and the good wife syndrome he nurtured forced me to awaken a powerhouse who had been dormant inside me all along. I look back at the woman I was, the queen of that crumbling castle, not with pity but with a strange sense of gratitude. She had to be demolished so that I could be built. The strength I have now wasn't found by forgetting the past, but by using every single crumbled brick to build something new, something real, something unshakable. This isn't just my divorce story. It's a testament to the fact that rock bottom is the most solid foundation you can ever build on. The ruin wasn't the end of my story. It was the blueprint. Before the ruins, there was a garden, a sprawling, impossibly green lawn at a friend's annual summer fundraiser in the Hamptons. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and hydrangeas, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in a soft, forgiving gold. I was there with a college roommate, feeling a little out of my element, a law student surrounded by people who seemed to have already figured it all out. And that's when I saw him. He wasn't the loudest man in the room or the most ostentatiously dressed. He was standing near a white trellis, talking to the host, and he had this quiet confidence that seemed to pull the whole garden into his orbit. My first impression wasn't of fireworks or a lightning bolt. It was a feeling of stillness, of recognition. When he finally turned and his eyes met mine from across the lawn, he smiled. It wasn't a pickup artist's smile. It was genuine, a little lopsided, and it made his eyes crinkle at the corners. When he walked over, the noise of the party seemed to fade into a low hum. He asked me my name, and when I told him, he repeated it back to me, as if he were trying it on for size. What drew me in wasn't just that he was handsome. He was in that classic all-American way. It was that he listened. He asked about my classes, my dreams of becoming a lawyer, and he listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. In a world that often felt like it was moving too fast, he felt like an anchor. In those early days, he was the embodiment of potential. He was ambitious, but his ambition felt noble. He talked about building something, not just for himself, but for a family. He was studying finance, and he spoke about the market with a passion I'd only ever felt for constitutional law. He made it sound like an art form, a way of creating security and opportunity out of thin air. He was charming, of course, but his charm was rooted in what felt like a deep well of integrity. He was the kind of man who opened car doors, who called when he said he would, who remembered the small details of your conversations. He projected an aura of absolute capability, making you believe that whatever he set his mind to, he would achieve. He made the future feel not just bright, but guaranteed. I remember one night, maybe our fourth or fifth date, we were walking through the city after a late dinner. A sudden downpour started, and we ducked under the awning of a closed bookstore. We were soaked and laughing, and everyone else was rushing by with their umbrellas and their serious faces. He turned to me, his hair dripping, and he tucked a wet strand of mine behind my ear. He said, "This is what I want. Not just the fancy dinners, but this, the unexpected moments. Building a life that's so strong, it can handle any storm." He pulled me closer and said, "I'm going to take care of you. You'll never have to worry about a thing. You can focus on what you love, and I'll build the fortress around us." In that moment, under that awning, with the city lights blurring in the rain, I believed him. I believed in the fortress. I believed he was giving me the ultimate gift, a future without fear. I had no idea he was just showing me the blueprints for my own beautiful prison. The proposal wasn't a surprise. In a life that was becoming increasingly mapped out, it felt like the next logical destination on our shared itinerary. He took me to a small inn in Vermont for a fall weekend. The air was crisp, and the world was on fire with the colors of turning leaves. He'd arranged a private dinner on a screened-in porch overlooking a quiet lake. It was all so perfectly staged, so beautifully produced. He got down on one knee, the diamond in the velvet box catching the candlelight, and he didn't just ask me to marry him, he gave me a speech. He spoke of destiny, of two paths converging, but mostly, he spoke of building. "Let me build our world," he said, his voice earnest and low. "Let me build the walls so high that nothing can ever touch us. All you have to do is say yes, and make it a home." I said yes, of course. I cried. It was the easiest yes I had ever given. What woman wouldn't want that? A promise not just of love, but of absolute safety. I slipped the ring on my finger, a perfect, glittering symbol of the fortress he was going to build around me. I saw it as a promise of protection, a testament to his love. I didn't see it for what it truly was, the first beautiful gilded brick in the wall of my future prison. Our first few years of marriage were a blur of blissful construction. We were architects of the American dream, and we were following the blueprint to the letter. We bought the house in the suburbs with the good school district. It had a big backyard for the golden retriever we planned to get, and a front porch with a swing. I remember the day we got the keys. We walked through the empty rooms, our voices echoing, and we didn't see drywall and bare floors. We saw a future. We saw crayon marks on the walls, Thanksgiving dinners in the dining room, a Christmas tree in the living room. He held me from behind in the empty kitchen and whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." It felt like the beginning of everything. Our dreams were a shared script. He would climb the corporate ladder, and I would build the nest. When I got pregnant with our first child, the decision for me to leave my junior associate position at the law firm felt simple, almost preordained. "It just makes sense," he said, rubbing my swollen belly. "You can focus on what's important, and I'll handle the rest. We're a team." And I believed we were. He was the provider, the hunter-gatherer in a suit and tie. I was the nurturer, the heart of the home, the chief operating officer of our family. I poured all of my ambition, all of that fire that my college friend had asked about, into creating the perfect life. I curated our home, our social life, our children's schedules, with the same meticulous attention to detail I once applied to legal briefs. It was a different kind of success, but it felt real, it felt important. There were so many moments of happiness, so many snapshots I could pull from the album of our shared lie. But one stands out, one perfect, crystalline memory, that, for years, I held up as the pinnacle of our love. It was the night we brought our daughter, our firstborn, home from the hospital. The house was so quiet. After the sterile chaos of the hospital, the silence felt sacred. We put her down in the bassinet in our room, and for a long time, we just stood there, side by side, watching this tiny, perfect human sleep. The only light was the soft glow from the hallway, casting long shadows on the floor. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on our daughter. "Look what we made," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. It was raw, unguarded awe. He finally turned to me, and his eyes were glistening. "I promise you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure neither of you ever has to worry about a single thing. I will build an empire for you." In that moment, bathed in the soft light of our quiet home, with our new baby breathing softly beside us, I felt a love so profound, so absolute, it felt like it could hold up the world. I believed in him. I believed in us. I believed in the empire. It was the most beautiful, most perfect, most unshakable moment of my life. And it was the most devastating lie of them all. The empire he promised was supposed to be built of stone, a legacy for our children. But somewhere along the way, The architect changed. The man who once held my hand and watched our daughter sleep became a ghost in his own home. The change wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, like a coastline giving way to a relentless tide. It began after his big promotion, the one that was supposed to be the final cornerstone of our financial security. Instead, it became the catalyst for our collapse. He started working later, his nights filled with client dinners and market analysis. The fortress he was building for us suddenly had walls I couldn't see over, and he was the only one with the key. The language of our partnership shifted. It used to be we and us. Now it was my investments, my portfolio, the pressure I'm under. When I'd ask about our finances, trying to stay engaged, he'd give me this tired, patronizing smile. "Honey, it's complicated. You've got enough on your plate with the kids. Let me worry about it." It was always framed as an act of love, of protection. He wasn't excluding me, he was sparing me, but it felt less like being protected and more like being locked out. The treasury of our kingdom was now a black box, and I was being told not to ask what was inside. The emotional abuse wasn't loud. It was a quiet, constant hum of dismissal. It was in the way he'd cut me off at dinner parties, if the conversation turned to finance or politics, laughing to our friends. "She's the creative director of our family. She leaves the boring stuff to me." Everyone would laugh, and I would smile, feeling my face burn with a strange mix of pride and humiliation. He was praising me and diminishing me in the same breath. He was painting me into a corner, making me the good wife, who didn't have the capacity for the serious business of the world. And the most insidious part? I helped him paint. I accepted the role because it was easier than fighting the narrative. The first real crack in the facade wasn't a fight. It was a piece of mail, a thick, cream-colored envelope from a bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to both of us. I was about to open it when he walked in, saw it in my hand, and his whole demeanor changed. The easygoing smile vanished, replaced by something hard and unreadable. He plucked it from my fingers. "Just another credit card offer," he said, his voice a little too casual. "I'll shred it." He turned and walked into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. I stood there in the hallway, my heart thumping. It wasn't what he said, it was the speed with which he did it. It was the first time I realized the fortress had secrets, and he was the guard at the gate. The betrayal, as I understood it then, wasn't about another person, it was about the truth. I began to live with a low-grade hum of anxiety, a feeling that the floor beneath me wasn't quite solid. I started noticing things. A charge on a credit card statement, one I was still allowed to see, for a restaurant in a city he hadn't mentioned visiting. When I asked, he was smooth. "Oh, that must have been from the airport during a layover. You know how it is." He had an answer for everything, and each answer was designed to make me feel like I was the one who was crazy, suspicious, ungrateful. "Why are you cross-examining me?" he'd ask, turning my concern into an accusation. "After everything I do for this family, you don't trust me?" He was making my intuition the enemy. He was gaslighting me into believing that the smoke I was smelling wasn't a fire, but just a figment of my overactive imagination. This was the true nature of his control. It wasn't about telling me what to do, it was about defining my reality for me. He was the architect of our world, and he was telling me the blueprints were fine, even as I could feel the foundation beginning to shake. The loneliness of that time was profound. I was the queen of a perfect kingdom, surrounded by friends and family who saw the beautiful exterior, who told me how lucky I was. And I was completely, utterly alone, inside the crumbling walls, starting to suspect that the king I had loved and trusted was, in fact, the one holding the wrecking ball. The breaking point wasn't the confrontation, it wasn't the discovery of the papers. The breaking point came 3 days later. 3 days of living in a Cold War truce in our own home, sleeping in the guest room, moving like ghosts past each other in the hallways. I was still reeling, still trying to process the scale of the demolition, and he was acting. He was acting like it was a spat, a disagreement we would eventually smooth over. On the third night, he walked into the kitchen as I was mechanically making a sandwich for our son and said, "So what are we thinking for dinner?" I was craving that roast chicken you make. He said it with a smile. A casual, everything is normal smile. As if he hadn't just confessed to detonating a bomb in the center of our lives. As if my world wasn't a smoking crater at my feet. In that moment, the last fragile thread of hope I didn't even know I was holding on to, snapped. It wasn't just that he had betrayed me. It was that he didn't even see me. He didn't see my pain, my terror, my grief. He just saw a domestic appliance that was temporarily on the fritz. He saw the good wife and expected her to reboot and get back to her scheduled programming. I put the knife down on the counter, very slowly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the man I had loved was gone. In his place was a stranger wearing his face. I want a divorce, I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I had just learned. They hung in the air between us, more solid than the marble island. His smile didn't just fade, it curdled. For the first time in this whole ordeal, he looked genuinely shocked. Not sad, not regretful, shocked. As if a piece of furniture had just spoken. A divorce? He scoffed, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. Don't be ridiculous. You can't divorce me. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. And there it was. The truth of our entire marriage, spoken out loud. I wasn't his partner. I was his asset. And I was in default. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in dismantling a life. He stayed in the house, of course. It was his kingdom, his fortress. I was the one who was exiled. I packed my bags in a daze, while he made phone calls to his lawyer in the other room, his voice a low, angry murmur. Our friends, they fractured. Some rallied around me with fierce loyalty, bringing casseroles and boxes to my tiny temporary apartment. But others, the ones who had only ever seen the perfect facade, were confused. Are you sure you're not overreacting? One of them asked me over the phone. All couples have money problems. They couldn't see the ruin because the house was still standing. They didn't understand that the foundation was gone. The divorce process was not amicable. It was a war of attrition. He wasn't fighting for me or for our family. He was fighting to win, to prove that he was still in control. Our life, which I thought was built on love, was reduced to a series of brutal negotiations over assets that didn't exist and debts that were all too real. His lawyers were sharks, and their strategy was simple. Portray me as the clueless, complicit wife who enjoyed the lifestyle but shirked the responsibility. To them, my trust was not a virtue. It was a form of negligence. The lowest point came during my deposition. I was sitting at a long, polished table in a sterile, windowless room. On the other side was his lawyer, a man with cold eyes and a smug smile. He slid a stack of papers across the table. It was a summary of the debts. Mortgages, lines of credit, personal loans. The final number at the bottom was so large it seemed fictional. Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, are you asking this court to believe that you, a woman with a law degree, had no knowledge of any of this? That this level of debt was incurred without you knowing a single thing? Every head in the room turned to me, my own lawyer, my husband, the court stenographer. In that moment, I was stripped bare. I had to admit, under oath, to the full extent of my own vanishing act. I had to say the words out loud. That's correct. I did not know. The shame was a physical thing. It felt like a hot liquid pouring through my veins. It wasn't just about the money. It was the public declaration of my foolishness. The official record of how completely I had abdicated my own life. I wasn't just a victim of his deception. I was the star witness to my own gullibility. The day I signed the final papers was gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate. We weren't even in the same room. I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the thick stack of documents that represented the legal dissolution of half my life. My hand was shaking as I picked up the pen. I thought I would feel a rush of anger, or a wave of profound sadness. But what I felt was quiet. A deep, hollow quiet. I signed my name, my maiden name, which I was taking back, on line after line. Each signature felt less like an ending, and more like a beginning. It was the closing of a painful, fraudulent chapter. It was the severing of the last tie to the architect of my ruins. I pushed the papers back across the desk, took a deep breath, and for the first time, the air didn't feel heavy with the dust of a collapsed building. It felt clean. It felt new. It was the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of standing at zero. I had nothing, which meant I had everything to build. The silence after the storm is a strange thing. For the first few months in that little apartment, after the last paper was signed and the war was officially over, the quiet was an enemy. It was a physical presence that amplified every fear, every regret. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I'd forgotten to pick a child up from soccer practice, or that the alarm wasn't set for his early flight. And then I'd remember. There was no practice to drive to. There was no flight. There was just me, in a small room above a laundromat, surrounded by the deafening silence of a life that had been completely erased. The loneliness was a heavy blanket. I had mourned the loss of my husband, the man I thought he was. But now, I was mourning the loss of the woman I had been. The manager, the mom, the wife. Her job was gone. Her purpose was gone. And I didn't know who was supposed to show up in her place. But in that crushing emptiness, tiny sparks of something else began to appear. It started with the television remote. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I had sole custody. I could watch whatever I wanted, for as long as I wanted, without a running commentary or a sigh of boredom from the other side of the couch. It was a ridiculously small thing, but it felt like a revolution. Then it was deciding to have cereal for dinner, just because I could. It was buying a ridiculously bright yellow throw pillow because it made me happy, with no one to say it didn't match the decor. These weren't just choices, they were acts of reclamation. Each one was a tiny whisper saying, I'm still here, my preferences matter, I exist. I started taking long walks with no destination, just to feel my own legs moving under my own power. I reconnected with my college friend, the lawyer. We met for coffee, and for the first time, I didn't have to rush home to get dinner started. We talked for 3 hours. I told her everything. She didn't offer pity. She just listened, and when I was done, she looked at me and said, Welcome back, I've missed you. I realized I had missed me too. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, chaotic process. I found a therapist, a kind woman, who helped me unpack the years of subtle manipulation and gaslighting. She gave me the language for what I had experienced, and, more importantly, she helped me see that my trust hadn't been a weakness, it had been exploited. I wasn't an accomplice to my ruin. I was the survivor of it, and that job, that entry-level administrative position, it became my sanctuary. It was a place where my worth was measured by my competence, not my cooking. I started taking on more projects, rediscovering the sharp, analytical mind that had been dormant for so long. The part of me that once loved the law found a new passion in organizing complex projects and solving problems. I was good at it. Hearing a boss say, "Great work, Sarah," was a balm to a soul that had only heard its value reflected through someone else. Today, my life doesn't look like the American dream. It looks like my dream. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment now, in a vibrant part of the city I never would have considered before. It's not a castle, but it's a home. Every book on the shelf, every piece of art on the wall, is something I chose, something that speaks to me. My routine is my own. I wake up early, not to the demands of a family, but to the quiet joy of a cup of coffee and a good book before the world gets loud. My work is challenging and fulfilling. I was promoted twice. I'm now a project manager, and that first wobbly bookshelf I built feels like a prophecy. I spend my days taking chaos and creating order, not just for myself, but for my team. The woman I am now understands that strength isn't about having high walls to keep the world out. It's about having a strong core, so you can stand tall no matter what storm comes. I've learned that my value is inherent. It's not something that can be given to me or taken away by a man or a bank account. I learned that true partnership has to be a transparent collaboration between 2 whole individuals, not a merger where one person gets absorbed into the other. My intuition, the one he taught me to doubt, is now my most trusted compass. Have I forgiven him? That's a complicated question. I don't think I'll ever forgive the deliberate, calculated cruelty of his actions. I don't think I have to. But I have forgiven the situation. I have let go of the rage that was poisoning me. It was like carrying a bag of hot coals, thinking I could eventually throw it at him, only to realize my own hands were the ones getting burned. Dropping that bag was the final act of my liberation. His story, his choices, they don't get to be the main plot of my life anymore. He's a character from a previous chapter, and I'm the one writing the rest of the book. As for the future, I'm not looking for a fortress anymore. I'm not looking for someone to build a world for me. I'm too busy building my own. Am I open to love? Yes. But my criteria have changed. I'm not looking for an anchor. I'm looking for someone with their own ship who wants to sail alongside me for a while. My happiness is no longer a destination I need someone else to drive me to. It's the air I breathe, every day, in this life I built. From the ground up, one crooked, wobbly, beautiful, and unshakably strong piece at a time. If I could reach back through time, to that woman standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, the one who believed her kingdom was safe, what would I say to her? I wouldn't tell her to run. I wouldn't try to save her from the pain. The fire was necessary. But I would whisper something in her ear. I would tell her, your intuition is not paranoia. It is your compass. That small, hollow feeling you get is not you being ungrateful. It is your soul trying to get your attention. I would tell her that her value is not a reflection of her husband's success, but a light that shines from within her, and that she has been dimming it for far too long. And most of all, I would tell her that a true partner doesn't hand you a role to play in their life. They make space for you to be the star of your own. And if you are listening to this right now, and my story echoes in the silent hallways of your own life, if you feel the floor beneath you starting to tremble, or if it has already collapsed and you are sitting in the dust, listen to me. The shame you feel is not yours. It was placed on you, a heavy blanket designed to keep you from moving. Throw it off. The fear you feel is real, but the terror of disappearing completely if you stay is greater. Your life is not over. It has been cleared to the foundation. And a solid foundation is the greatest gift an architect can have. Your new life will not be built in a day. It will be built one small, terrifying, triumphant step at a time. It will be built with the first paycheck that has only your name on it. It will be built with the first piece of furniture you assemble yourself, crooked as it may be. It will be built with every quiet morning you get to decide how your day will unfold. These are not small victories. They are the cornerstones of your freedom. You are not just surviving a demolition, you are an apprentice, learning to become the master builder of your own soul. So please, do not look at the rubble of your past and see only what you have lost. Look at it as the quarry from which you will gather your stone. Every lie, every tear, every moment you thought you would break, that is your strength. That is your material. You are the architect now. And the life you will build with your own two hands, on your own terms, will be stronger and more beautiful than any gilded prison anyone could ever build for you. The ruin wasn't your legacy. The masterpiece you build from it, that will be.